Okay, so move on to Parkinson's dementia. Parkinson's dementia is different than Parkinson's disease. You can have Parkinson's disease without having Parkinson's dementia, but you have to have Parkinson's disease to get Parkinson's dementia. Does that make sense? We also know that people that develop Parkinson's disease at much earlier ages oftentimes will never develop Parkinson's dementia. So Michael J. Fox, the likelihood of him developing dementia symptoms is not very high, just because he was so young when he developed it. About 14 to 40% of people with Parkinson's will develop dementia. There's usually a lot of overlap with symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and so there's some controversy about whether or not it's superimposed. The controversy there is that Parkinson's disease is subcortical, so it's white matter in the brain again. So if you take your brain, you slice it in half, the top layer will be gray, that's the gray matter, and then the bottom layers will be white, and that's the white matter. And it's white matter because it's got fatty around the nerve endings down there, so it's white. And so Parkinson's, vascular dementia, those take place deep down the brain, and those are our balance centers and different things like that. So a little bit of a controversy there. Memory impairment and executive functions are the most prominent. Executive functioning, we'll talk about, but executive functioning is essentially the ability to organize, plan, sequence a plan, and follow through with it. So executive functioning is the frontal lobe part of the brain. It is something that we use daily. And we use it in small forms and large forms. So here's an example. This morning, I got up in Wichita. My alarm went off at 3:45, and I knew that I could hit snooze twice. 18 minutes. I knew that at that point I had to get up, showered, ironed, get in the car, go get coffee. Priorities, right? Go get coffee, and eventually drive up here. I knew that I'd get here by a certain time. I'm one of those people that would rather be an hour early than 1 minute late. So I was an hour early. So I was over at Panera, had it planned out, look at my notes, get over here in time. That's an executive function, right? It's organized, it's planned, it's sequenced, and it's carried out. In its more complex form, I have X number of dollars. And I know that at the end of the month, I have to pay this bill, and this bill. I know that on this month, my quarterly bills are due. So when somebody says, can I borrow 50 bucks? I have to weigh that, plan it out, organize it, and then decide if I can do that. That's in its complex form. And so when we see deficits in executive functioning, we see things that we take as very, very basic, getting much more difficult for individuals. Frontotemporal dementia, FTD. There's various types of frontotemporal dementia that are getting a little more prominence. We're getting better at diagnosing things. So there's all these different types. The basic thing is there's no amyloid plaques and there's no tangles, and those are symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the key thing with frontotemporal dementia, and I realize on the printout this is like super small, but socially inappropriate behavior is one of the key symptoms here. And inappropriate sexual behavior. These are people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who become promiscuous. You would never see that. But it is complete deviation from how they were before. And these are people who get extremely agitated. These are people who get very upset, who do things without judgment, and they make changes to their wills and to their states just on the fly. And this is a concern. The compulsive behavior. Oral fixation, by the way. This is when they're always like chewing gum, like gnawing on something. That's how you would see that in a normal everyday event. And you might see some motor difficulties. But the key thing is the change in how they present themselves interpersonally. And it's a dramatic change. It's a dramatic change. It's noticeable. Absolutely noticeable. Lewy body dementia. Lewy body dementia is relatively new in the diagnosis world, but it's been around for a while. And the way that we got to know Lewy body dementia is they changed the way that they do a slide of the brain. So when you do research on the brain, you take a slide, a thin slide, and you stain it. And the stain collects to certain bodies. And when they changed the staining method, they realized that some people had Lewy bodies in the cortical region of their brain, so on the surface of it. Well, the problem with that is that Lewy bodies are not supposed to be there. Lewy bodies are subcortical, and we see Lewy bodies with Parkinson's patients. So what is a Lewy body doing cortically? Well, what it's doing is it's causing Lewy body dementia for these people. And one of the key symptoms in Lewy body dementia is visual hallucinations. And these visual hallucinations are not frightening to them, oddly enough. I've had people that have had herds of sheep in their backyard, like it's no big deal. Or the person sitting on the stairs, or the dog and cat that keep visiting them. They don't have a dog and a cat. It's really, it's interesting, a little bizarre, but it's a visual hallucination. Now the problem with this is that they have these visual hallucinations. They tell their kids, yeah, can you do something about that sheep in the backyard? And the kids are going, you live in an apartment. And they take it to the doctor. Tell the doctor, mom's seeing sheep in the backyard. Doctor goes, well, here, have an antipsychotic, right? That's what doctors do. They write scripts. Antipsychotic. You give an antipsychotic to somebody with Lewy body, it gets dramatically worse. So you give them an antipsychotic, and all of a sudden there's visual hallucination, there's paranoid, and they're violent. So you take them off the antipsychotic, and then you got to deal with it differently. And usually you deal with it just by going, it's not frightening them. It's not a big deal. So there's sheep in the backyard, right? So that's kind of how you do it. But what happens is the way it gets diagnosed is through a rule out. Kind of like the way bipolar often gets diagnosed. Somebody is depressed and they're actually bipolar and they're given an antidepressant and also they go into a full-blown manic. And the doctors go, oops, and they change it. They change the medication, and that's how often people with bipolar get diagnosed. Same way with Lewy body. So you get some Parkinsonian stuff. This is the Lewy bodies, again, that's supposed to be Parkinson's, visual hallucinations, and so on. Just that. All right, Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. Roughly 70 to 80% of individuals with dementia have Alzheimer's disease. About 24 million people globally, predicted to double every 20 years. About 5.4 million people in the United States. Interesting side note, of those 5.4 million, just under 1 million of them live alone that have Alzheimer's disease. 5.2 of these are 65 and older. So Alzheimer's disease, everybody thinks old with Alzheimer's disease. People with family Alzheimer's disease can develop it in their 40s. I've seen people in their 30s with Alzheimer's disease. Now typically, just side note, those are people with very strong family histories. And so it's a little bit different sort of genetic load. People that develop at age 65 and older, which we would consider late onset Alzheimer's disease, those are people that might have a genetic load and some environmental factors. Nearly half of all people age 85 clinically have Alzheimer's disease. Risk factors, cerebrovascular disease, blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, body weight. We know that when we're younger, we want people to be a little leaner. When we're older, we want a little bit more pound on us, not obese, but a little more weight. That seems to protect. Lipid levels, smoking, people that smoke are at much higher risk. People with depressive symptoms, psychological risk, and then traumatic brain injury. There was an interesting journal that came out. It was a supplemental journal talking about the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia in our veterans. And they were specifically talking about the Iraq veterans. Not the first Iraq war and the second Iraq war in Afghanistan. And there are these sort of predictive analyses that are basically saying that we're going to see an incredibly high incident rate of Alzheimer's in our veterans because of the traumatic brain injury. Because we've gotten so good at keeping people alive in the field, and they come back and they have TBI, we're going to see a much higher incident rate of dementia in the veterans. So you think the Veterans Affairs is struggling now, give it 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to be a horrible, horrible mess. There's an interesting article. Protective factors. Healthy diet. We know that the Mediterranean diet is typically the one everybody thinks about. Mediterranean diet Everybody thinks it's olive oil. It's really more fresh fruits and vegetables that we're looking at. Olive oil helps, but it's fresh fruits and vegetables. Physical activity, intellectual activity. Looking forward, roughly 7.7 million Americans by 2030. The financial impact, current financial impact of unpaid caregiving is in the billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. So it's like 200 billion right now that we pay out of pocket, about 1.1 trillion cost to Medicare and Medicaid by year 2050. Alzheimer's disease is the only illness in the top 10 that is not treatable or curable. It roughly sits at about number 6 causes of death. The strategic plan that came out a couple years ago basically talked about how we weren't prepared for the hurricane that hit NOLA, and we responded after the fact. And essentially that's where we are right now, that we are responding after the fact. I'm very active with the Alzheimer's Association. I know that as an organization we're doing a bunch of work trying to get funding for different types of research and trying to find a cure and different sort of policy things, but we're behind the curve, way behind the curve. And anybody who's active in politics knows that it's an uphill battle to try to get funding for stuff these days. It's just an absolute battle to get funding for things, even something like Alzheimer's disease. So recently we changed the diagnostic criteria. And what's key about the diagnostic criteria is that they changed it to recognize that when we officially diagnose somebody as Alzheimer's disease, that is the final stage. So that's important. Think about that for a minute. They're basically saying that there is a preclinical phase of Alzheimer's disease, then there's the mild cognitive impairment phase, and then there's Alzheimer's disease. And so Alzheimer's disease becomes the last bit. So when somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, they are officially late stage. Now there are stages within that, but by the time they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it's already reached its peak. So, let me just show you something, because I think this is where are we? You are in pretty much okay. So, this slide right here, it's kind of right, a few slides ahead. So, I've been working in the field of Alzheimer's since 1995. This is the most important slide I've ever seen in all my years of doing work and research in this field. And here's why. So, you see this CSF AB42. So beta amyloid is AB42. So beta amyloid develops amyloid plaques. And so plaques are one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. So 1906, Dr. Alzheimer, there actually was a Dr. Alzheimer, worked with a woman, and when she died, he found plaques, amyloid plaques, and he found neurofibrillary tangles. Those two things are still the hallmarks. So the CSF AB42 is amyloid plaque 42. So what amyloid is, it's a protein fragment. And this protein fragment gets used to nourish the brain and the cells. When it gets clipped off at one certain point, which happens to be the 42nd point, okay, so when it gets clipped off at one certain point, 42, it gets sticky, for whatever reason. And it gets sticky, and then it gets around other sticky ones, and it clumps together. And that's a plaque. And there's millions of these things in there. They get stuck together. And the original thinking used to be that these plaques interfered with the transmission of neurotransmitters. So if you remember your basic high school biology class, there's a neuron, and comes into the dendrites, then there's a synapse, and there's more dendrites in the neuron. And it used to be that we thought that these plaques collected in the middle there, and that interfered. The current thinking is this, is that those plaques are actually protective, like a jail. You get these millions of beta amyloid 42s hanging out together, they're all contained. But when about 5, 6, or 7 of those little pieces clump off and break away, those are the problem. Well, here's the issue. We know that if I get a big old needle and I stick it in your spine and I pull out some cerebrospinal fluid, I will see some beta amyloid, right? It's supposed to be there. All of us have beta amyloid. The issue is, if I look at that cerebrospinal fluid and there's not any beta amyloid, that means it's doing something it's not supposed to do. It's someplace else. And that becomes an early symptom of Alzheimer's disease. When your cerebrospinal fluid does not have the beta amyloid, that means it's someplace else. It's like you have your teenage kid. They're supposed to be downstairs. Well, what do you mean they're not downstairs? Something's gone horribly wrong, right? They're out causing a problem with a little gang of friends getting in the way of the synapses. And that is beta amyloid. Now, tau, CSF tau. So you have your neuron. This is the other one. The neuron is supported by another protein fragment called tau. And it's like a train track. And it's the cross braces on the train track. And what happens is the tau, the little protein fragment, gets weak. And it gets holes in it. It becomes phosphorylated. It gets holes in it and it breaks. And when it breaks, it folds, and then it goes and does something else, but then that neuron collapses and becomes a tangle. So it's a train track without its braces, and it collapses on itself. And that's a neurofibrillary tangle. Well, if I use that same needle, and I put it in your spine, and I find tau, tau is not supposed to be there. And that is how we know something's going on. So what's important about this is that if this is cerebrospinal fluid, beta amyloid, and this is tau, they are practically at their peak by the time we start seeing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. That means that if you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease at age 75, at approximately 60 or 65, it's already going on. That is the current research right now. So Halloween parties are coming up. These are things to share, to impress people. But this is what's happening. So which means all the research is going this direction right now. All the research is, can we prevent this from happening? So all the medication research, everything is going early now. It's totally fascinating work. But this is what's going on. So when they change the diagnostic criteria, and they say there's a preclinical phase, it's designed just for research, right? Because what do you tell somebody who's in this stage that's like, oh, this is not good? And we don't know when, but it's going to happen. I mean, that's the ethical issues behind that get pretty extreme, right? There's a whole thing around doing sorts of genetic testing. What do you tell people when it's not the way you want it to be? So this is what's going on right now in the research world. This is amazing work. And it's changing the whole field. Changing the whole field. So the preclinical phase is basically looking at cerebrospinal fluid, and then also doing something that they call PET imaging, and they're able to look at amyloid and PET imaging for tau. So they can do a scan of the brain, and they can see if the amyloid's building up. So this is preclinical. Now, in the preclinical phase, people often start complaining of memory deficits. Now, this is pretty normal with older adults, by the way. Older adults will come in and say, I just can't remember so-and-so's name, or I get stuck on a word sometimes, or I can't remember an appointment sometimes, and they start, freaking out, because they're thinking dementia is what they're thinking. They're thinking Alzheimer's. So you get this area called subjective cognitive impairment. This is cognitive impairment that people complain about that you can't measure if you were to do an objective test. It's just their complaint. So the key is, how do we differentiate age-related cognitive decline? The joys of getting older is that we tend to slow down a little bit. It takes us a little bit longer to do some stuff. Some of that depends on prior levels of functioning. It just takes a little bit more time. Memory deficits, a little more often, a little more frequent, but nothing that gets in the way. So we get age-related cognitive decline, ARCD, versus subjective cognitive impairment, which is, I think something's going on. And then you get MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is measurable impairment, but not enough to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. So to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, we have to have standard deviations. So we get these stages going on. We know that roughly 33%, about a third of the people who have official MCI, mild cognitive impairment, will never develop dementia. Interesting side note, those individuals have become a huge research group, right? We want to know why. Why is it that they have this? It's measurable, but they're not moving forward. We also know, for example, people with Down syndrome. We know that if people live long enough with Down syndrome, virtually 100% of them will develop Alzheimer's disease. 100%. At the very least, they'll develop the clinical pathological features of Alzheimer's disease. They will have neurofibrillary tangles, and they will have amyloid plaques, specifically the amyloid plaques. And the way we know this, one, is we've been watching them, and they live long enough, but they've been living longer. That's just medical advance. It's helping them live longer. But the reason people with Down syndrome do this is because they have an extra 21st chromosome. And we know that the 21st chromosome is responsible for dictating where that amyloid gets clipped. The extra 21 starts to predict it's going to get clipped at that 42nd point. So what's fascinating is that a large percentage of people with Down syndrome, while they may develop plaques and tangles, don't ever develop the clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. They don't develop the memory deficits that we would see. They don't develop language deficits greater than they might already have. And so now they've become a research group that could possibly hold some of the answers to treatment, which I think is beautiful, by the way. This is a group that's been discarded for decades, and they might actually hold the answer. I think that's fantastic. But it's fascinating. So why are they doing this and not developing the symptoms? And that becomes a question that's going on in research. So a person goes from age-related cognitive decline, subjective cognitive decline, to mild cognitive impairment. So measurable deficits, but not impairing daily life. And then we move into this reasoning ability, language, behavior. Some things might be down. Handling complex tasks. These are people that they might not remember to pay all their bills on time. They might get confused with the financial statement, which, let's be fair, aren't the clearest things in the world. And they move on, and we go into Alzheimer's disease. So again, Alzheimer's disease is our late stage. Alzheimer's disease is the end of the process. So in Alzheimer's disease, we see all sorts of different things. So the baseline is our diagnosis of the dementia. So again, it's a decline from previous levels of functioning. Impaired ability to acquire and remember new information, which, by the way, is kind of how memory works, right? Our brains pick up everything. Our brains pick up every piece of information. So when I'm driving up here today, it's like scanning everything. And what happens is, it takes most of that and throws it out. Not important, not important, not important, not important. And then something sticks. That's important. Click. The ability to attach meaning to that, however we do that, is how it goes from short-term memory to long-term memory. when we put meaning to something, whatever that meaning might be, that's how it gets filed away. Different. So one of the theories on Alzheimer's disease is not so much the person can't remember, it's that they're unable to attach meaning to things anymore. That the organizational skill necessary to do that cognitively has declined. So it's not that they can't remember, it's that they don't put the meaning there. So it's a little bit different way to approach it. Impaired reasoning and handling complex tasks, poor judgment, impaired visual spatial abilities. This is the ability to scan the environment. So when I got up here today, I don't ever go to Overland Park. So I got up here today, my phone told me how to get here, and then it's like, okay, well, let's go to Starbucks, and oh look, there's a Panera, I'm just gonna stop at Panera. And then when I leave Panera, it's like, okay, I know the Sheraton is by there, and I can see the Sheraton, so I need to just go that way. That's a visual spatial cue, right? We scan the environment, we pick out what's important, and we use that to help us get around. Do it all the time. People with Alzheimer's disease lose the ability to do that, where it becomes impaired, which is one of the reasons why they get lost in their own neighborhoods. Because they've lost the ability to make those kind of visual cues. Impaired language functioning, and then you see changes in personality and behavior. And typically the changes in personality are really kind of an exaggeration, typically, of previous personality. Does that make sense? So it's not that this person just becomes a completely new person. It's just that if we take away the cognitive skills that are used to function in our world, then underlying personality gets exaggerated. So I think road rage is a great example of this, right? All of us know that we shouldn't use our car to ram people, even though we might think about it sometimes when they cut us off. But that internal clock goes, nah, not a good idea. Your insurance agent's not going to like it, the police aren't going to like it, don't do it. Just let them do it, no big deal. Go Zen, go Buddhist on it, just no big deal. If you take away that is a cognitive skill. You take that away, then what you get is anger or whatever that's unfiltered. That's the changes that you often see in personality of people with Alzheimer's disease. It's unfiltered. So they make statements that like, oh, really, Grandma? No, yeah, because it's unfiltered. One of the key changes in the diagnostic criteria are that they separated it out. What they're basically saying is that Alzheimer's disease is no longer dependent on impaired memory. There's an amnestic presentation, which is the memory deficits. Then there's a different presentation, and that's the non-amnestic. And this is when people have language deficits and visual spatial deficits or executive function deficits that are more prominent than the memory. That's a big shift. It used to be that memory had to be the key. That's no longer the case. People can have Alzheimer's disease and still have relatively intact memory functioning, but then deficits in all these other areas as well. Again, memorize this slide. I put it on Facebook, nobody liked it, I was very disappointed. Because you put things on Facebook, and it's like, how many people are going to like this? Because I think it's the biggest thing in the world. Nobody. Nobody. All right, elder abuse. So, key things with elder abuse. First of all, the victim is never responsible, right? There's something going on, they're never responsible. What we do want to recognize is that there becomes a situation where the victim and the perpetrator hook up somehow. So there is a relationship somehow, however that's defined. But the victim is getting taken advantage of. There's all different types of elder abuse. Physical abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, neglect, and a lot of times there's overlap between those. And, I got to speaking on elder abuse. I got involved in a case in Wichita where a couple, elderly couple, not married but living together, which, by the way, you see more and more of, which freaks out their kids. But you see people living together because they don't want to lose the benefits from their spouses who are now deceased. So if somebody has the pension from their spouse, they don't want to give that up when they get married, so they'll live together. And that way they each keep their own financial affairs. So I got involved in doing some of this. This couple living together had this group of people who basically used them as an ATM store. And so what they did is they'd go, became friends, quote unquote, and they would borrow 50, 60, 20, 30 bucks at a time from this couple. And every time that they borrowed money, the woman would write down the name and how much and the date on a little slip of paper. Well, when the police finally got involved, they went in and they bagged up in those big garbage lawn bags, like 3 or 4, full of these little slips of paper. What they know of is roughly $350,000 in these little slips of paper. That's what they know of. They think it's probably closer to $500,000. And they prosecuted these guys, of course. But, interestingly enough, the couple saw these people as friends, because they were the ones who visited them. There's the context for the relationship. And then these people, who ended up in prison, took advantage of that. That's that context relationship. So when we're talking about elder abuse, you always want to try to find what's the context for the relationship. What's the reason these two are together, or these 3 or 4, or whoever they are together? Physical abuse, bodily injury, pain, impairment. Restraint is a big one. By the way, locking a person in the house is against the law. It's restraint. So sometimes you get caregivers who are so stressed out, they just want to go out, or they need to go to a doctor's appointment or something like that, and they'll lock the door. That's a restraint. It's illegal. Neglect, failure to meet the needs, psychological abuse is the infliction of mental and emotional anguish. So this is the kid threatening mom or dad, I'll never talk to you again, or I'll take the grandkids away from you, and so on, that type of stuff. And then the financial abuse, which is the illegal use of their properties. This includes not only taking their money, but it becomes people becoming the beneficiary of the estate, or having the house transferred into their name, or getting their name put on a checking account, which, by the way, if their name's on the checking account, they can write checks, and they can take the money, and it becomes legal unless you go back and prove that the person wasn't competent when they were doing that. So we don't want to shift blame. Caregivers, again, are a very high risk factor, and so it's what you see with a lot of caregivers is caregivers that are overwhelmed and they don't know what to do, and instead of asking for help, they lash out. And so, when a spouse hits the other one, it's, I told you to stop that, and smacks them. You're leaning towards abuse. Because if a person's impaired, they don't have the ability to defend themselves, nor do they have the ability to be processing in a way that prevents them from getting in a situation where they might get struck. You see that? So even small things like that become issues to pay attention to. And so you want to look for bruises. Even more important than bruises, because older adults do bruise, especially if they're on certain medications, is you want to look for skin tears. Because the skin gets thinner as you age, and when people get hit or scratched, the skin tears really easily. And that's what you want to start paying attention to. Overwhelmed, impaired, you get the narcissistic person who's just having their own needs met, domineering or bullying, and then you get the sadistic, and these are just bad people. And this happens all the time. And I know that the state of Kansas tries to stay up on this stuff. We're coming into storm season again before, when people will start working on things at the house. These are when these groups of people go from door to door to door. And they find an older adult, I can fix your house, I need $5,000 up front. Older adult thinking, well, hey, this saves me time. They're in the neighborhood, they must be they got a sign on their truck. They write them a check and then off they go. Nothing ever gets done. And this happens all the time. And this happens even more so in Kansas after a storm. When there's hail damage on people's roofs, these people just come out of the woodwork. It's incredible. So the red flags for you guys to pay attention to. Sudden reluctance to discuss financial matters. When you guys are in the field, they should be just talking with you. And when they start saying, I don't want to tell you how I spent my money, or I don't want to tell you who this check's going to, I just need you to write me a check. That's when you just need to start paying attention. Unexplained withdrawal, abrupt changes in wills and trust. Now, I realize that sometimes people get mad and they want to write somebody out of the will. At the same time, it's okay to say to them, hey, let's think about this a little bit. Or it's okay to put them off a little bit. Because it's your job to assess, and we'll talk about this in just a second, what their capacity is. It's your job to assess where they're coming from. Changes in beneficiaries, increasing lack of contact, so if they're isolating themselves, or if you call their house and their caregiver won't let you talk to them, that's a red flag. That's a massive red flag. And some people just admit they've been taken advantage of. Confusion about missing funds, unusual or first-time wire transfers, especially to foreign countries. And yes, those emails do work. They show up in my junk drawer daily. You know, dear sir. And then it's all broken English, and they want me to wire money to them. They work. That's why they keep sending them out. Because if you send out 1 million of those things and you get 3 people to respond, you just made $300,000. That's good cash. Fear of eviction or nursing home not being paid. So another case that I worked on in Lyon County, the reason that people got caught is because they didn't pay the nursing home bill. If they would have paid the nursing home bill, nobody would have known that, in fact, they had sold the 1,000-acre farm. They had bought a truck and a house for themselves with her money. They just would have paid the bill, but they didn't. Also in prison, by the way. Oh, and the insufficient care. So this was another key. The woman that I just talked about, she, had a lot of money, but her hair never got done, her teeth, she never went to a dentist. The family wasn't doing what they were supposed to do. The nursing home said something's wrong. They looked into it, found out what was happening. So those are some of the red flags. So we look into capacity. Capacity is a complex term. And the reason it's complex is because it depends on the type of capacity you're looking at. Because there's capacity for all sorts of things. So there's testamentary capacity, donative capacity, contractual capacity to pay real, property, real property, all those different things. So it gets really complicated. Because you're basically asking yourself, does the person have the ability to make an informed decision? It does not have to be a healthy decision. Let's make that clear. It just has to be an informed decision. In testamentary capacity, the level is very different. So testamentary capacity is basically, does the person have a general idea of what their assets are? Do they have a general idea of the relationships of the person they want to transfer to? And are they aware of why they want to do that? That's basically it. It's very low level, which is very different than the capacity used in a guardianship and conservatorship evaluation. Extremely different. Because a guardianship and conservatorship evaluation, you're basically looking at not only does the person have the ability to make an informed decision about health care, but you're also looking at contractual abilities. Because the conservator level offers that contractual ability. It's different. And so that's the statute. But what's key here is that in the field of psychology, when we do research, we look at the difference between cross-sectional research and longitudinal research. So cross-sectional research is a moment in time. So I'm going to take a group of people, I'm going to run an experiment, and I'm going to get a result. That is cross-sectional. That is a moment in time. Longitudinal research is I'm going to take a group of people and I'm going to do research with them over periods, over an extended period of time, over a year, over 2 years, over 20 years. That's longitudinal. The issue with capacity is that some capacity only requires cross-sectional research. It only requires, at this moment in time, do they have the ability to make this decision? That's it. And you have to allow that. Whereas some capacity requires, is this consistent with what their wishes have been all along? And that's longitudinal. So it really requires knowing your client as best that you can, which I realize gets complicated. Because we live in a fast-moving world, and sometimes the only time you talk to your clients are tax season, when they're looking at what their gains and losses are. I get that. But we have to know them because we have to be able to differentiate between those things. So, financial capacity is being able to do all sorts of things. So can the person identify and count money? Can the person understand debts and loans? If they want to take a loan from their 401k, do they understand that they do have to pay that back even though it's their own money? Do they do understand there's a small interest rate on that? Do they do you want to explore these things with them because that gives you an idea of where they are cognitively, right? It isn't just do they know this information, it's how well are they processing the information. If you say, well, yeah, you can do that, but it's a 50% interest rate, and they go, oh, no big deal, then you, 50%'s a lot. If they go, oh, that's a lot, then you're just like, okay, they're recognizing the pros and cons. You have to understand the nuance in this, because it's that nuance that really kind of differentiates people with cognitive impairment and people without. Because people with cognitive impairment think black and white, it's binary, it's either this or it's this. The fact of the world is that we live in the gray, and you have to be able to kind of move back and forth between those. So conducting cash transactions, paying bills, maintaining judgment, and so on. And so, this is from one of your guys' printouts that I got, but I like it. It's the 10 Commandments of Financial Capacity. Thou shalt presume capacity. So even though the son or daughter have called you and said something's going on, your assumption with your client should be they have it. It should be you're going to start with a blank slate. You're going to do the assessment yourself. Always do the assessment yourself. I get doctors sending me stuff, and they go, here, we can send you this whole file. And I usually say, go ahead and send it, but I often don't look at it until I meet with the client myself. So I will actually meet with them and talk with them and get an idea of what's going on, and then even while they're there, then I'll start flipping through the notes. Because then that adds to it, and I can ask them questions to clarify. But I want to get my first judgment. I want my own first judgment, because I trust my clinical judgment better than somebody I don't know. Doesn't mean they don't have clinical judgment, but I just trust mine better than theirs. And then we can add it in. Talk to the client alone. Take steps to maximize capacity. The goal is to help a person be as independent for as long as humanly possible. So take the steps to put things in place so that they can do that. Whether that's a trust, or verbal powers of attorney, or making sure you're talking to family in advance, and so on. Thou shalt not worse than any one standard for capacity. Thou shalt not covet the many mental status is in. Everybody knows what many mental is, right? Many mental is basically you're asking them, tell me the date, tell me my name, here's 3 words, can you repeat them for me? Can you spell world forwards and backwards? Tell me those 3 words again. Simple commands. You get a score out of 30. The problem with that is people that are with high education, they do well with that no matter what, unless they're significantly impaired. So it doesn't do well. The better test, interestingly enough, is called the clock drawing test. Clock drawing test is a simple test. You grab a piece of paper. I do this with clients all the time. Put a piece of paper in front of them. Say, tell you, here, just try this for me. I want you to draw a clock. And I usually make a circle. Draw a clock. I don't draw a circle. I just put my hands. And I say, put all the numbers in the clock. And then set the hands for 10 minutes after 11. That's the instruction. Now all of you are going, come on, really? You would be surprised at the number of people who cannot do that. Because it's an executive function. I have to draw a clock. Complete circle is a visual spatial task. I have to put all the numbers in place. That's organizing and planning in advance. I say 10 minutes after 11, not 11:10, 10 minutes after 11. Because that's a mental manipulation task. I have to realize that it's not the 10 and 11 next to each other, it's 10 after. I have to move that around, then I have to plan how to put the hands in place. It's an incredibly complex task. You'd be surprised at how many people put all the numbers in the first half, and they go, oh. And then when they catch themselves, you want to know, can they then fix it? Because a lot of people realize they're doing something wrong, but they have no idea how to make it better. That's an issue. So don't pay attention too much to the mini mental. Do a clock test. I realize just kind of rough judgment. If it looks off, explore a little further. Query with the word capacity to do what? This is finally changing in the state of Kansas. In other states, there is capacity or lack of capacity for very specific tasks. And so they're changing the laws. Here it's kind of all or nothing currently. They're finally changing that. They're working on changing that. Look at the big picture. Honor your client's wishes. Look at their history. Honor their confidentiality, even in the face of incapacity. Right? Those durable powers have to be in place before you start sharing information with too many people. And then plan ahead. And then these are hard conversations to have with people. What will happen if something goes wrong? People don't want to talk about it. Because it brings up all the family dynamics, right? Because which one of the kids do you trust? Which ones don't you trust? And when it comes to people's finances, they get kind of itchy about it. They don't want to share too much. Burden is on you guys to basically balance autonomy and beneficence. So self-determination and protection. You have to balance those two things. And that's tough, because it's often not clear. We get our cognitive concerns, which we talked about. These are our cognitive domains: executive functioning. Working memory is complex information, manipulated around your head, give an answer back. Language, attention, concentration. We talked about visual, spatial. Cognitive signs of incapacity. Repeats the question. Forgets what is discussed. Cannot remember the past 2 days. Things are vague. Trouble staying on topic. Disorganized. Bizarre statements. Comprehension difficulties. These are all things that should be red flags to you. Things that tell you to put the brakes on a little bit, explore before you move forward. Lack of mental flexibility, calculation problems, disorientation. We talked about the mood dysfunction, suicidality, alcohol and drug abuse, emotional distress, delusions, poor grooming and hygiene again. Get our medical concerns. These are all things that you're factoring in. These are all things you're paying attention to. And you'll do it quickly. You don't need a checklist. You'll do it quickly. When something seems off, trust your gut. And then explore. And then make the changes from there. The key things is you get some other differences. You get educational differences and cultural differences. You've got to take all these things into account. This is what makes working with older adults, working with people, frankly, a complex job. It's not just about finances. It's not just about coming in and doing therapy. It's paying attention to all these different things. You're the ones that have to hold on to all this with your clients. And so what basically comes up to do is this. The more serious the concerns about the following. If you're concerned about, is the decision consistent with their long-term values? Is the decision objectively fair? Is the decision reversible? So the more serious your concerns about that, then the higher the function is needed in this area. Can they articulate reasoning? Is it consistent over time, again, longitudinal? And can they understand the consequences of their choice? So the higher function is needed in that. So the more concern you have, if you're more concerned on this end, the more you need on this end. And then you just start trying to put the pieces together. Are there observational signs of diminished capacity? Are there mitigating factors? And then, if it's intact, go ahead. If there's mild problems, then you have to kind of slow it down a little bit. Maybe even send out for another evaluation. Greater than mild, you got to really seriously consider that. And then if there's severe problems, you have to not proceed. That's your job. It's your job, again, self-determination and safety. If they're impaired and there's severe problems, then safety is your primary thing. It's like, no. And yes, that's going to mean you're going to lose clients sometimes. But that's your responsibility to protect them. And that's that nuance again. And that's the complex nature of working with these people, working with older adults. It's the nature of the beast. Oh, that's me. All right. I'm done. Any questions?